Welcome back to Podcast Infinity, where we give your brain a dose and help you grow smarter. Be sure to check out the description for all of our sources if you want to learn even more after the show. Today, we're strapping on our crampons, at least virtually, and heading to the top of the world, Mount Everest.
Ah, Everest. Yeah, it really holds a special place in, I think, all of our imaginations, As the highest point on Earth, it's not just a mountain, it's this amazing symbol of human ambition, this drive to do the impossible.
But it's not all, triumphant summits.
Yeah.
There's also the other side of Everest, a much darker history, with all the tragedies and the stark reality that over 300 people have died trying to get to the top.
Yeah. And one that a lot of people know about is what happened on May 10th, 1996. A huge blizzard trapped climbers high on the mountain. 13 died that day, making it one of the deadliest days in Everest history. It was this really tragic event that, showed everybody how dangerous high-altitude mountaineering can be, even for the most experienced climbers.
It's funny, Everest is actually getting taller every year. It's not just a mountain, it's kind of this dynamic, always changing force of nature.
Yeah, that's right. So millions of years ago, the Indian and Eurasian tectonic plates started colliding, and they're still at it. This continuous collision pushes Everest up about a centimeter every year. So if you climb it today and make it to the top, well, tomorrow it'll be just a little bit higher.
It's like it's always moving, like a target you can't quite hit.
Yeah.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, how did this giant mountain even form in the first place? I know you mentioned tectonic plates, but could you break it down a little more for us?
So picture this. About 120 million years ago, the Indian subcontinent wasn't anywhere near where it is now. It was way down south, part of a huge supercontinent called Gondwana. Over a really, really long time, India drifted north. And it was moving fast. Eventually, bam, it slammed right into the Eurasian continent. That incredible pressure, all that force, made the land buckle and fold upwards, creating, the Himalayas. And right at the top, like a crown jewel, sits Mount Everest.
So the same forces that create continents are still pushing Everest higher. That's incredible. It's no wonder it feels so massive.
It really is. And it's not just this geological marvel. For the Sherpa people, they've lived in the Everest region for over 500 years, it's a deeply spiritual place.
Oh, yeah. You can't talk about Everest without talking about the Sherpas. It's incredible, their relationship to the mountain. It's almost like a spiritual connection. What is it about their perspective that makes it so unique?
Well, for the Sherpa, Everest isn't just a mountain, it's sacred. They call it Chomolungma, and that means Goddess Mother of the World in Tibetan. They believe that the mountain is home to all these deities and spirits, and they treat it, with so much respect.
A mountain is a goddess. That's amazing imagery. Do they have any rituals or traditions associated with Everest?
Yeah, definitely. One of the most important is the puja ceremony. Before any climb, Sherpa climbers will hold a puja at base camp. They're basically asking the mountain gods for permission to climb and for a safe journey. They give offerings like food and incense and these prayer flags. It's all about getting blessings for a successful climb.
It's fascinating. They see the mountain as this living thing that you have to appease before you even try to climb it. And of course, they've been living and climbing in this harsh environment for generations. Their knowledge is essential for modern climbers, right?
Absolutely. They know Everest like the back of their hands, the terrain, the weather, the dangers. They can read the mountain's most subtle signs, which is crucial when you're up there dealing with all these treacherous conditions. Honestly, their expertise has been, crucial to the success of so many expeditions on Everest.
Makes you wonder, when did this whole idea of conquering Everest start? Was it always seen as this challenge that people had to overcome?
So those early mapping expeditions back in the 19th century, they kind of sparked interest in the West. But it really wasn't until the early 20th century that people started trying to get to the top. That idea of reaching the highest point on Earth, it really captured people's imaginations. It basically started a race to the top.
I bet those Western explorers didn't always, acknowledge the Sherpa's history and relationship with the mountain, did they? I feel like there's often a tendency to overlook their expertise.
Yeah, you're right. Sadly, the focus was always on who would be the first to reach the summit. And that often meant overlooking the Sherpas and their long history of climbing and exploring the mountain. Their contributions, they were often kind of pushed aside, especially in the, in the Western stories.
A classic pattern, unfortunately. So when did someone finally reach the summit for the very first time?
Well, the first confirmed ascent was in 1953 by Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, a Sherpa climber. It was a huge achievement, a turning point for mountaineering.
And since then, over 6,000 people have followed in their footsteps. But I can't imagine it's gotten any easier.
Not at all. Everest is still this incredibly dangerous and challenging mountain. You really have to be at the peak of human endurance to even attempt it. There are two main routes to the top. You've got the South Col route, which starts in Nepal, and then you have the Northeast Ridge route, which starts in Tibet. Both of them are really demanding. You need months of prep. You have to acclimatize to the altitude, and you need all this specialized equipment.
So it's not like you can just, pack a bag and head up the mountain. It sounds more like, I don't know, a military operation.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And the higher you climb, the harder it gets. Above 8,000 meters, climbers enter what they call the death zone.
Just the name, the death zone, is a little scary. What makes this zone so dangerous?
Well, up there, the oxygen levels are only about a third of what they are at sea level. Basically, your body is starved for oxygen, and that can have some really serious, really bad effects.
A third of the oxygen? I can't even imagine. What happens to the body when it doesn't get enough oxygen at that altitude?
Oh, it's just bad news. You get dizzy, headaches, you feel nauseous, and you're just incredibly fatigued. Your judgment gets cloudy. It's hard to move your body. And some people even have hallucinations.
Oh, wow, that sounds terrifying. And those are just the immediate effects, right? What are the long-term dangers?
So the worst things that can happen are HAPE and HAC. That's high-altitude pulmonary edema and high-altitude cerebral edema.
Those sound scary. What are they exactly, and what do they do to the body?
So with HAPE, your lungs fill with fluid, which makes it really hard to breathe. It's basically like drowning, but you're on dry land. And then with HACE, fluid builds up in the brain, causing it to swell. You get all sorts of neurological problems like confusion, disorientation, and you could even fall into a coma.
So you're battling altitude sickness, barely any oxygen, and then there's the chance of these life-threatening conditions, all while trying to climb this incredibly treacherous mountain. No wonder they call it the death zone. And even if you have, supplemental oxygen, it's still not a guarantee, right?
That's right. The oxygen tanks can help, but they're heavy, and you can only carry so much. And, they don't totally eliminate the risks of altitude sickness. It's this balancing act between having enough oxygen to function and being able to move efficiently, which is, it gets really hard the higher you climb.
It really shows how unforgiving that environment is.
Yeah.
And as we mentioned earlier, not everyone makes it back from the death zone.
Sadly, that's true. And a lot of the bodies of those who die on Everest, they just stay there, frozen in time. A stark reminder of just how dangerous it is.
We'll come back to that thought after a quick
reminder of, how dangerous Everest can be. Which brings us to, well, it's kind of grim place, but climbers call it Rainbow Valley.
Rainbow Valley. Doesn't sound very grim. Kind of cheerful, actually, for a place on Everest.
Yeah, the name is a bit misleading. It's called Rainbow Valley because of the clothing of the climbers who have died up there. All those bright colors frozen in the ice. It's a pretty haunting sight.
We talked earlier about how hard and dangerous it is to retrieve bodies from that altitude.
Right. I mean, just imagine bringing down one body. It can cost tens of thousands of dollars. You need a huge team of Sherpas, like a dozen or more. And helicopters, well, they can't really fly reliably above a certain altitude. The air's too thin, so they can't lift much. And the winds, they're unpredictable and dangerous.
So in a way, they become part of the mountain. It's tragic, but it also raises, some ethical questions. Like, is it our responsibility to bring them down, even with the danger?
It's a really tough question. And it's not just the bodies. There's all the trash left behind by expeditions. Tons of it every year.
Yeah, it's hard to think about. But even a place like Everest isn't safe from, human impact. What kind of trash are we talking about?
It's pretty much everything. Empty oxygen cylinders, climbing gear, food wrappers, tents, even, human waste. Mm-hmm. The Nepali government, though, they're trying to do something about it. They've got these Sherpa teams that go up and clean up the mountain. They've removed tons and tons of garbage over the last few years.
Oh, wow.
It's a huge job, but so important. It makes you realize that even Everest, this, incredible natural wonder, isn't immune to the effects of human actions. And that brings us to another side of Everest, the economics. I mean, it's big business now, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it is. For Nepal, Everest expeditions are a huge part of their economy. We're talking over $300 million every year just from permits, guides, equipment, lodging, all that stuff.
And for the climbers themselves, it's not cheap either, right?
No, not at all. You're looking at spending anywhere from $25,000 to over $100,000 for an Everest expedition. Mm-hmm. Depends on, the level of support you want, the route you take, and all the, the extras. Yeah. Wow, that's quite a range. So you've got all these climbers with all these different reasons for wanting to climb, and they're fueling this, multi-million-dollar industry. But that also raises questions about, over-tourism, right?
Yeah.
And the potential for exploitation.
You're right. Those are valid concerns. There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of debate about the impact of so many people climbing Everest. It's a fragile ecosystem. And there are ethical questions, too, like Has commercialization made it less safe? Are there more inexperienced climbers trying to reach the summit than there should be?
Which takes us back to John Krakauer. Remember, he's the journalist and climber who survived that 1996 Everest disaster. In his book Into Thin Air, he was really critical of how commercialized Everest has become and how dangerous it is for climbers and the Sherpas.
Yeah, he was. He basically argued that some of these tour companies, they care more about making money than they do about the safety of their climbers. They'll take anyone, even people who aren't prepared for how tough Everest is, and then push them too far.
He had that one line that really sticks with you. Above 8,000 meters, it's hard to afford morality. It really makes you think, how extreme environments can change our values and what we think is right and wrong. But even with all the risks, all the costs, and the ethical issues, people are still drawn to Everest. Why is that? What is it about this one mountain that makes people want to risk everything to reach the summit?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I don't think there's just one answer. I mean, for some people, it's the ultimate physical and mental challenge. They want to push themselves further than they ever have before, see what they're really made of. For others, it's about the adventure. It's about going into the unknown, experiencing something truly incredible.
It's almost like Everest is this giant icy mirror.
Yeah.
Reflecting all our hopes and desires, even our weaknesses.
That's a great way to think about it. Psychologist Andreas Wilk, he said that part of what makes Everest so appealing is that it's got this clear hierarchy of achievement. If you reach the summit, you did it. You accomplished something tangible, measurable. And that's pretty rare in a world where, success is often kind of vague.
I see what you mean. It's like a yes or no answer. Did you get to the top? Yes or no. No in between.
Exactly. And historian Maurice Acerman, he pointed out that Everest might not be the most difficult mountain or the most beautiful, but it is the highest. And that makes it, a super powerful symbol of what humans can achieve.
So it's like the ultimate trophy.
Yeah, kind of. But once the mountain was, conquered, the goalposts moved. Now, climbers want to stand out. They want to find new ways to push the boundaries of what's possible on Everest.
So it's not just about reaching the summit anymore. It's about how you do it, like pushing human endurance even further.
Right. And we see that in climbers who tried to summit without supplemental oxygen or those who climb with disabilities. They show that even the most challenging goals are achievable, if you have the determination and the resilience.
It's like Everest has become this canvas for human ambition and this drive to do extraordinary things. But it's also a place where people have to face their own mortality, in a very real way.
For sure. Climber Alan Arnett, he's summited Everest 4 times. He described it as this horrifying challenge that can be measured. He said Everest has a clear distance, different stages and an end point. Not like a lot of life's goals, which are, they're not so clear-cut.
So maybe climbing Everest is, in a way, simpler than navigating, all the complexities of everyday life. You have this one massive goal, this huge obstacle, and you either overcome it or you don't. There's something kind of appealing about that.
Yeah, maybe. But even in its simplicity, the story of Everest is all about the people who climb it. Their motivations, their struggles, their triumphs, and sometimes their tragedies. It reminds us that even when things are incredibly tough, the human spirit can overcome anything.
Lucas Ischia, he's another survivor of that 1996 disaster. He said that Everest, it just gives a story and that's it. But it's a story that keeps us coming back, It makes us think about our own ambitions, what we're willing to risk, and that human desire to push beyond our limits.
It's a story that works on, 2 levels. There's the grand, almost mythical level, but then there's this very personal level, too. We're drawn to these stories of people pushing themselves, facing the impossible, and sometimes achieving things that, that seemed impossible.
It's the hero's journey, right? You face these trials and tribulations, you battle your inner demons and the challenges around you, and in the end, you come out changed, whether you win or lose. And Everest, it's like the ultimate proving ground.
Yeah, exactly. It pushes climbers to confront their deepest fears, what they think they're capable of, and what really matters to them in the end.
So it's not just about, conquering the mountain. It's about conquering yourself.
I think so. It's about pushing past those limits, the ones you put on yourself, the ones that are real, and seeing what's on the other side of fear and self-doubt.
So for our listeners out there, what do you think? Why are people so drawn to Everest, even though they know how dangerous it is? What is it about this mountain that makes us so fascinated with it?
It's a great question. Is it the challenge, the adventure, the desire to, make our mark on the world, prove something to ourselves, to others, or maybe it's something deeper, a need to experience something beyond the everyday, a longing to connect with something bigger than ourselves?
We've talked about all the physical stuff, the dangers, what drives people. But what about the mental side of climbing Everest? What's it like being up there, in that thin air, dealing with those crazy conditions.
Well, a lot of climbers say that as they go higher, they feel this like heightened awareness, almost like a spiritual experience. The world kind of narrows down to just that moment. You're super aware of your breathing, your heart beating, the sound of your boots on the snow.
Like the mountain forces you to focus on like the most basic parts of yourself, no distractions.
Exactly. And then when you finally reach the summit, there's this huge feeling of accomplishment. Like, wow, I pushed myself beyond what I thought was possible. It's pure exhilaration, being on top of the world. Literally.
But I imagine there's got to be a lot of relief too, right? Like the hardest part is done. I can finally start going down.
Oh, absolutely. Reaching the summit is only half the battle. The way down is just as dangerous, maybe even more so. You're exhausted, your body is worn out, and it's easier to make mistakes.
Right, you're not out of the woods until you're back at base camp.
Exactly. And, success on Everest, it usually depends on a whole team. Your fellow climbers, the Sherpa guides, the support team down at base camp. It really shows you the power of, human connection and working together.
It's like a mini version of life, right? We all need help. We all need support to reach our goals, no matter how big or small those goals are. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Everest, I feel, a mix of awe and humility. Like I'm in awe of the mountain itself, how huge it is, and the human spirit that pushes people to climb it. And then there's humility, realizing how powerful nature is and how, we're just small beings in this vast world.
I like that. You said it perfectly. Everest reminds us that, we can do amazing things, but we're also really vulnerable to things we can't control. It's a place where we can, see what we're made of, face our fears, and maybe in the process learn something really important about ourselves.
And maybe that's the real reason why Everest is so alluring. It's not just a mountain, it's this reflection of all our hopes and dreams, even our fears. It represents that drive we have to achieve something truly extraordinary. This is Podcast Infinity, signing off.